to 6, a helping hand with your land.
Neil from Messick's here to do a video for you today on understanding the spec sheets that are on the back of these manufacturers' glossy brochures. All too often people who are new to this industry will read through the back of one of these and not understand a lot of the intricacies of what they're looking at and make a lot of purchasing decisions maybe based upon this information. Going to help you understand which of these things actually matter, maybe give you a little bit of context to how some of them are presented to you, and discuss a little bit on some of the buying process that I see as really the smart way to go about these things. This is one of the very rare videos that I could do with both a New Holland and a Kubota in the same video. I'm a dealer for several brands of equipment. We sell both Case IH, New Holland, and Kubota machines. And the value in looking at both of these today is understanding that the spec sheets between these manufacturers are not necessarily consistent from one model to the next, even within a manufacturer's own product line. That's because when you look at these, there's a lot of different ways that these things can be framed, or different specifications that they may be measured to, that even when you think you're making apples to apples comparisons of things, you may not actually be doing that. A good example of that is horsepower, and that's a lot of times where people start with this kind of stuff, right? We're all very programmed to be hyper-focused about horsepower of our cars, our trucks, our lawnmowers, whatever. Horsepower is power to us. And in tractors, that's kind of a half-truth. It is an important number. It's something that you want to know, but understanding that the weight of the machine, the type of transmission that you have, the kind of hydraulic capabilities that your tractor has are equally as important as the horsepower itself. In every specification sheet from pretty well every manufacturer, you're going to consistently find sometimes at the minimum 2 horsepowers, every once in a while 3. Those are going to be gross horsepower, kind of the big test block type horsepower, a net engine horsepower, that's the actual horsepower that thing creates in the tractor itself, and the most important of them, the PTO horsepower, the amount of power that actually goes through the engine, passes through the transmission, then it is delivered out the rear PTO where it's available to your implements and that kind of thing. That PTO horsepower is important because you'll find the efficiency differences between different manufacturers' transmissions. Another thing that you want to note when you look at this is that sometimes on these spec sheets, you're going to find an engineering specification listed on how that engine horsepower was tested, and sometimes you won't, which leads sometimes to some questions of what it is exactly that you're looking at. More often than not, when you see an engineering specification listed, that model is usually going to be slightly underrated compared to the other models on the market that may not be going to the point of listing that specification. You should know that there are multiple specifications that are used out there on the market today, and some are more advantageous to paper than others by a couple percentage points or so when it comes down to that. And we've actually seen models that manufacturers have come out with new models and seen like exactly the same engine and exactly the same tractor actually having these numbers change a little bit, just depending on the numbers and the specification that they're listing on those spec sheets. So this is something that generally I'm going to tell you, you don't want to get hung up about. If you see one tractor and you're comparing to another and you've got a difference of less than 10% or so, more often than not, that's not a difference that's going to be detectable in the seat when you're out actually working with a machine. So small differences in horsepower don't matter. You can look at it kind of as a given range to get an idea of what a tractor is capable of, but definitely not something to make a purchase decision on for a couple percentage points one way or the other. On the back of every one of your machines, you're going to have a PTO back here, a power takeoff, and generally on the spec sheet, you're going to find a little bit of information about it. Now, we talked about PTO horsepower earlier as being really important, the amount of engine horsepower that makes it out that little stub shaft on the back of your tractor. But a feature that's often buried in this spec sheet is the option of 540 or 540E. The E variant there gives you a shift, basically a gear selector for that PTO and allows you to run your engine a little bit more slowly, but still having this thing spin at 540 RPMs. That's really useful when you have a whole lot more engine horsepower available than what your implement requires. It allows you to run your tractor's engine a little bit more slowly, but keeping that implement still spinning at its 540 RPM so it's operating properly. Think, 72-inch brush hog on a 75 horsepower tractor, right? You need about half that amount of power to actually spin that mower. While that is a feature that years ago I saw a lot of value in, anymore I start to question whether it's worth the additional cost or not that those gears add. While it certainly is nice in that it allows you to run your engine at a little bit slower speeds, the real use for it years ago used to be fuel economy. And with a modern Tier 4 engine and the fact that that engine is really delivering the amount of fuel needed for a torque load, not necessarily just to spin a shaft really fast like you would have done with an old mechanical fuel pump, the need for it in the fuel savings really isn't there anymore. So it's a feature that you might want to look for if you're going to be doing a lot of that kind of work. I like the noise savings, but it's not going to do a lot for you for fuel in a modern tractor. If you're looking at different size machines, that's something that you tend to find up in this utility class. It's not something generally found on compact tractors. We're up into generally 60, 70 horsepower and above where you're going to start to find that 540E called out on the spec sheet. So we know the amount of PTO horsepower we have. We know the RPMs that it's going to spin at. There's also 3 different types of PTOs that are often called out on that spec sheet describing to you how they're driven. The best of them is an independent PTO that's a hydraulically actuated version separate from most of the other internals of your tractor. It's not in line with the drivetrain and the clutch. The other type would be a transmission-driven PTO. That's the most simplistic of them, and one you want to be very cautious of owning depending on the implements that you want to run. A transmission-driven PTO only works when that PTO is engaged and the tractor is in gear and driving forward, and all of the gears in the transmission are turning, and that's included in the way that that tractor's transmission is getting power out the back of the machine. The best case for that is in a brush hog. If you're out brush hogging with a machine with a transmission-driven PTO and you clutch in order to shift gears, that tractor is going to then clutch the PTO at the same time, causing your mower to stop or lose power every time you shift. The alternative to that, the improvement that's out there, is called a live PTO. A live PTO is driven in the same way, but generally is going to have a 2-stage clutch where the first part of the clutch travel clutches the transmission and the full clutch travel clutches the PTO. So be on the lookout for that. Those little distinctions can make a big difference in running a brush hog on your tractor, and generally it's called out in the PTO section of your spec sheet. Now, horsepower is one thing, but displacement is a pretty cut and dry number, right? Simply going in and measuring the amount of volume in the cylinder is pretty consistent from one machine to the next, with not a lot of whole ways to monkey with it. And it should give you kind of a relative idea of how much torque an engine might be producing inside that tractor. Usually it's expected that a little bit larger engine is going to be a little bit more torquey engine, maybe a little less fuel economical, but then there's going to be a lot of other things that come into play with that. More and more machines anymore down as low as 30 horsepower in some cases are being turbocharged, and that changes these numbers dramatically, particularly if you're at any kind of altitude. So understand, yes, engine displacement is something to look at, but also look into that equipment. Are you turbocharged or naturally aspirated? Sometimes if you take these and you'll find a block number listed on them, that's something that I like to search online. If you find the block number that's actually used in the machine, oftentimes you can go and find the specifications for that block, and it's going to tell you a lot of interesting information where you can get real torque curves and that kind of stuff. That's not something that you tend to find from the tractor companies themselves. Perhaps the most important place to spend time understanding these machines is in terms of their transmissions. The ability of that machine to put power to the ground is ultimately what you're after, and there could be some really significant differences from one machine to the next in the capabilities of their transmissions. When we're looking at small tractors, more often than not, say 90% of the time, we're usually talking hydrostatic transmissions or some fairly rudimentary gear drive versions. Once you start to cross about 50 or 60 horsepower or so, you'll start to get into more variations of those transmissions where we'll get shuttle transmissions versus both wet shuttle and dry shuttle, and then big tractors like this where we can get big power shifts and CVTs and all kinds of awesome things that these machines can do. When you're kind of in that sweet spot though, you're going to want to look for ultimately more speeds, particularly when we're in hydrostatics. You know, it's an infinitely variable transmission, as is the CVT and this big tractor behind me. Those are really nice things for being able to dial in the exact ground speed that you want for your transmission. But when you start diving into those power shift and shuttle type transmissions, more speeds is always better. Many of these machines that you'll find out here can be had with 8 or 12 speed transmissions, and a little bit of extra money for those more gears, to me, is always worth it. You'll very frequently find some frustration operating machines out in the field when you don't have enough speed selection. So if you have a choice to get those gears, you'll find those things laid out on these spec sheets, and you'll always want to go for the models that are going to give you more gears. You'll also want to look at the difference between the shuttles. When you have those gear drive transmissions, you'll usually have a shuttle up on the dash in order to change directions. Those things can be wet or dry clutched shuttles. Wet clutch shuttles are generally found in better, more deluxe tractors and will last longer. And they usually are coming along with hydraulic transmissions to change directions. So when you take that shuttle and flip between forward and reverse, the tractor is using hydraulic pressure in order to allow you to change directions without using the clutch. That usually leads to a smoother operator's experience, but also a much longer wearing life for those clutch plates that are in there as that machine goes back and forth. Those things can be major cost drivers. When you look through here, even within a given company's product line, and you'll jump from a hydraulic shuttle to a dry clutch transmission, you'll see a several $1,000 price difference between those machines because of all the mechanical complexity and quality parts and stuff that go into those better transmissions. But in my opinion, if you have a job that's more complicated than just kicking the thing in gear and going, a transmission is a place that's absolutely worth spending your money. Hydraulic capacity numbers on a tractor is one place that games are definitely played on these sheets sometimes. Most tractors like this are going to have 2 hydraulic pumps, one for the power steering and one for the implement loop. That implement loop is used for these remotes and your loader, any place that you're plugging those hoses in. The power steering system is really not relevant to the hydraulic capacities of the tractor at all. It is a pump that is there purely for steering. The place that these things get funny is that many manufacturers will go and not list these 2 pump flows separately. They don't list one for the implement and one for the power steering. They simply combine the 2 together because there are 2 pumps there pumping oil, but one of those pumps are wholly unavailable to you. So it's not really truthful the way that number is done. It results in a really big number on the spec sheet, but isn't really reality to what your tractor's capabilities are. You generally want to look for the machines that are breaking those out separately and giving you 2 numbers. It gives you a much more truthful idea of what your hydraulic capacity is. You definitely want to watch. There's cases where hydraulic capacity is useful for some applications and many more cases where it's not. We did a video earlier where having too much hydraulic flow can actually be a little bit of a detriment to your tractor. It does start to rob your engine horsepower. In some cases too, having a really big number and running a lot of flow through those hoses can make a loader that's not well engineered come off being a little jerky and that kind of thing. So hydraulic capacity is not a number that I tend to get hung up on unless you're looking to run implements that really need every ounce of that flow in order to operate properly. That tends to be more in the skid steer and construction equipment space than it is on tractors. So matters for some things if you need a certain amount of flow for like a planter vacuum pump, or you're trying to run some skid steer implements and that kind of stuff. Looking for a good implement flow number is good and helpful, but not something that I would lose sleep over when I'm going through and selecting my machine. Most companies are fairly consistent in calling out 2 specifications for the 3-point hitch, both here at the ball ends and then also a measurement approximately 24 inches back behind the tractor, more where the weight of your implement is centered. Now, in all of my years of selling tractors, I can't ever recall a time that I've really come into an implement that is pushing the 3-point hitch lift capacity of a tractor. It's something that, by and large, unless you've got some insane situation in mind that you just don't need to be worried about. If you're going through and sizing implements appropriately to the width of your tractor or the horsepower of your tractor, you're generally always going to have enough 3-point hitch capacity in order to lift things up. Again, we go want to look at the numbers if we are considering those things of looking at the one that matters. By and large, you don't lift anything here directly at the ball end, right? You can't have a weight of an implement centered right here. More often than not, it's going to be back here behind the tractor. So that 24 inches behind the 3-point hitch is the number that you want to look at if you're trying to get an idea of what your tractor is capable of lifting up in the rear. But again, another specification that I don't feel is really worth your time to even consider. A lot of people will go right to a loader's lift capacity as one of the most important factors when making their purchasing decision. And it's also simultaneously one of the things that's probably the least well understood. There's a lot of detail here that really can be given in how one of these loaders work, because things like the angle of these cylinders or where your measurements are taken down here in the linkage can have huge impacts on the lift capacity numbers that end up on these spec sheets. The more companies are telling you down here, generally the better you can feel about that piece of equipment. I really like the spec sheet here that New Holland is giving us on this loader. It's giving the better part of about 15 different measurements at different places of the loader of what it's able to lift. The number that you want to be extremely skeptical of is the ones that the marketing departments love to slap on the front of these things because they're really big numbers. That would be the lift capacity at a carrying height, about 60 inches off the ground, back at the pivot pin here where the loader bucket attaches to the loader frame. The problem with that number is that while it's really big, you're never actually going to be able to lift that much with your tractor. Just like when you lift something yourself, as you go further away from your body, it's a lot harder, right? It's much easier to carry things when they're pulled back against you. When you're looking at the geometry of your loader, you don't lift back here at these pivot pins, you lift out here at bucket center. So as you go through the specification sheets, you want to be looking for where those measurements are taken. You want to be watching for the measurements that are at bucket center, out where your load is actually centered, and not back at the pivot pin where you get a nice big marketing number. New Holland does a great job here on this sheet of giving all of these measurements, exactly what height they're being taken at and exactly how far forward they are being doing. So keep that in mind. You want to look for the ones here that are really telling you a lot, and if they've skimped out on this and they just give you lift capacity, you want to really look a little more carefully at the numbers to try to understand where they're being measured at. Cycle times are also listed on this, which is cool. It'll tell you how much hydraulic flow that tractor has in relation to the size of its cylinder and how quickly it's going to be able to lift that load up and down. I think that's a little useful, but at the same time, we don't often go and kind of race the loaders up and down, right? It's smooth and gentle motions are more than what you're looking for than just fast times. An important number on here can be the amount of clearance underneath that loader. If you're trying to load a dump trailer or get over the side of a dump truck or something like that, that's a good number to know, would be your lift clearance number and what your rollback angles and stuff look like. One thing that I would add to this conversation is taking all those loader numbers and also looking at them in relationship to the machine's weight. You'll find some tractors where the loader capacities are so high in this industry where we've got more and more players all the time trying to come out and stand out in ways. You're seeing loader capacities now on some of these machines that really go way beyond what the machine's base weight can actually safely handle. More or less, I'd put at best 50-50. If you have a loader that lists 1,500 pounds, you'd want your tractor to weigh at least 3,000 or so in order to be able to safely offset that weight that you have out in front of the machine and keep it planted. Also want to know, we've done a lot of videos on loader specifications and how to do these things safely. Ballasting your tractor is really important. If you've got one of these machines that's really pushing the capacities of that loader, you absolutely want to be looking at getting weights or fluid in your tires and that kind of stuff to add to that machine base weight. Get as much weight as possible back behind the machine to make that loader actually safe to use, because some of these tractors today, these modern machines, are really, really powerful for the size that they are, can really push these loaders really hard and really expect a lot of that tractor. And so ballasting that machine and making sure you have the base weight to go along with that loader is really important. So all of that said, I have one word of caution when it comes to understanding all of these things. I worry sometimes about the customers who come in and have taken, say, Microsoft Excel and lined all of these things up side by side to aid in their shopping process, as if any one of these numbers is going to come to some kind of magical conclusion of the best value tractor or the best tractor for the things that they're trying to do. None of this stuff really tells you ultimately what these machines are like to operate. I can't go through and look at these numbers and tell you, does the transmission drive smoothly? Does the loader operate in a way that I can lift and level my bucket at the same time? Is the seat a good quality seat? Does it feel good when I sit in it? When I go to look over my back shoulder or down at my loader, what do my sight lines look like? A lot of that kind of stuff has a much bigger impact on your enjoyment running a piece of equipment and how efficient it is to run. All of those kinds of things to me are way more important than anything found on the back of these brochures. So if you're going through the shopping process, let me caution you on that kind of thing. These numbers are not anything that I generally am going to use as a major buying decision here, right? My butt in the seat of a machine, the time that I take out here in the parking lot, driving stuff around is going to be far more informative. All too often, people will try to make decisions and come in here having done this research and have in mind the model that they think they want, and as soon as their feet hit the asphalt and they stand beside the machine, they make a completely different decision because this has led them astray in such a huge way. So understand that a lot of guys, you like to do that research online and come to your own conclusions. There is a place for good, educated salespeople in this business as well, helping you through these things. So don't let us be too scary when it comes to that kind of stuff. This is what we're here for. These are the kinds of things that we do. So if you're going through the shopping process for a piece of equipment, or if you have parts or sales needs for a machine you've already got, give us a call at Messick's. We're available at 800-222-3373 or online at Messick's.com. And that's often done with a hydraulic circuit that's going and engaging that, hold on, okay, operate in a lot of different contexts, and that was loud. Okay.